I see a thread running through our readings this morning. The thread that I see, and there's probably more than one thread, but this is the thread that I see and wanted to speak on, which is that of being spiritually lost and the lengths that God goes to find and to reconcile people into relationship with God's self and with God's people. First, from the Old Testament passage of the prophecy of the prophet Jeremiah, that I think goes a long way to describing the problem. The Lord speaks through Jeremiah about how his poor people are lost. They're foolish. They have no understanding. They don't know how to do good, but they are very skilled in doing evil. It is a prophecy of judgment of the people of Judah and Jerusalem that came from the prophet Jeremiah before the Babylonian exile. But through this passage, I could hear God's anguish and God's longing for people to be restored to God. Our psalm for today reinforces the theme where the spiritually lost are foolish and corrupt, and they do not call upon the Lord. The psalmist then speaks in verse 7 of the hope of deliverance, the restoration of God's people. Those who were once lost will be found. In the 1 Timothy passage, Paul explains how he was once lost. Formerly a blasphemer, a persecutor, a man of violence, who acted ignorantly in his unbelief. Paul was lost and then was found by Jesus, from whom Paul received mercy, and Jesus strengthened Paul and blessed him with grace, faith, and love. Maybe it made you think of this. It made me think of John Newton's hymn that could have been written just for Paul, and maybe for a lot of us. Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. In the gospel this morning, Jesus tells two parables to the Pharisees and the scribes. The first presents the imagery of a lost sheep. When found, that lost sheep is restored to the rest of the flock, at which point the shepherd celebrates. Jesus connects this with the great joy that heaven experiences when one sinner repents, in other words, turns to God and is reconciled with God. The second parable is the story of the woman who has lost one of her 10 silver coins. She searches everywhere for it. She sweeps the whole place. She finds it, and she rejoices. And again, the point is made that even more joy would be had in heaven over one sinner who repents and is reconciled with God. The message is pretty clear. God goes to great lengths to find lost souls, to reconcile people to God, and to reconcile people with each other. As we read in last Thursday's Sharing Grace, the letter from Reverend Catherine, she pointed out that the sheep and the coins are gathered back together with the shepherd and the homemaker, and with the rest of the sheep and the rest of the coins. And I just have to point out that I kind of love how the work of shepherding and of sweeping the floor are equally validated. Each and every person is so loved by God. But God has given us the freedom to live either according to God's will or according to our own will. And Jesus frequently sat and ate with sinners. He didn't shy away from associating with people whose lifestyle he disagreed with. He didn't force his own morality on others. He was simply present with them. And his compassion and his grace was and is enough to transform lives. In every generation since Christ came, there have been people who claim to be Christians, but by their actions don't seem to know Christ, who demonstrate in word and in deed that they have little to no understanding of the way of Christ. The Bible verses they might recite are often misinterpretations, used as a weapon to condemn and to harm others who are not like them. A dark spirit of division is blanketing our nation. Our country could arguably be likened to what was happening with the people in Jeremiah's prophecy. It feels like, as a whole, and in Jeremiah's prophecy, he was speaking to the whole, not to just individuals. As a whole, we are spiritually lost. We are ideologically at odds. Each side blaming the other for our woes and resorting to violence in word and in deed. What would God, in a Jeremiah-like prophecy, say about the people of the world today? It feels like there's nothing new under the sun, right? Ecclesiastes. I think we are foolish, stupid children with no understanding, skilled in doing evil, not knowing how to do good. What would the psalmist say? The Lord looks down from heaven upon us all to see if there is any who is wise, if there is one who seeks after God. I think God is in lamentation, and a lot of us feel lamented by what is going on in our world today. I must now, I wish I didn't have to, but I must now, I feel compelled to speak about what happened in Utah 4 days ago, when the conservative political activist and Christian nationalist Charlie Kirk was killed. Social media sites lit up with Kirk's followers accusing the radical left of his murder. Some people celebrated Kirk's death as they saw him to be racist, homophobic, and sexist. We cannot celebrate anyone's death, whether we agreed with his views or not. Some of my Christian friends and family who admired Kirk claimed that he spoke the truth straight from the Bible, that his murder was a hate crime that should be punished with the death penalty. Division and hatred continues to be stoked through social media and online forums, where algorithms and mob mentality reinforce our biases. I've had a deep thinking about my own participation in social media over the past week, and I have come to the recognition that social media is often really harmful to our mental and spiritual health. I invite you to consider your own participation and how maybe we can refrain from continuing to stoke these fires of division. Maybe we can be a force for good. Maybe we want to just remove ourselves from social media. Tyler Robinson, the suspect in the murder of Charlie Kirk, grew up in a conservative Christian family in Utah. But online, he wandered into something very dark called the Groypers, whose members mocked liberals, immigrants, LGBTQ people, and even they mocked mainstream conservatives. Robinson embraced this full Groyper ideology. He even, they found, had engraved bullets with their in-jokes. Yesterday we had our GEM picnic, and one of the nonprofits leaders that came, we had a little conversation about this and how initially that site that he had wandered into and became influenced by, it starts with humor. It started with humorous memes, seemingly not harmful. And this guy from the nonprofit said to me that he had read a study that humor can often lead to violence. Things that are laughed at can lead one person down the road to committing acts of violence. I guess we have to say, be careful what you laugh at. The Groypers taught Tyler Robinson to despise Charlie Kirk, not for being liberal, but for being too soft, not conservative enough. Since Charlie Kirk's death, various social media posts have surfaced blaming both the left and the right, emphasizing how wrong the other side has been or is, widening the divisions between us, and that is playing into the hands of evil. When we participate in that kind of stoking, we are participating in evil. Some people online are actually calling for civil war because of this. And I could argue that we are already in a civil war, a war of words, and sometimes a war with guns. On hearing the description of Charlie Kirk's murderer, the governor of Utah said this: "I had been praying that this person was from another country, that he was not one of us, because we are not like that. But it was one of us." This us versus them kind of thinking is harmful, and it illustrates just how reprehensible our politics have become. However, as my mom pointed out yesterday, I must give Governor Cox some credit, because I hadn't noticed this, but in the same speech, he also encouraged young people to embrace differences and to have difficult conversations. And as we talked about in Pastor's Forum, those conversations should be in person, face to face, and not just online, where we can so easily misinterpret when we're not face to face. To have difficult conversations without resorting to violence. To resist the temptation, Governor Cox continues, to resist the temptation to respond to violence with violence and hate with hate. That is a great message to have put out. He stressed that the only path forward for the country is to choose healing over hostility. We must try to find some kind of common middle ground, to seek and to recognize God's Spirit within each and every person, to respect the dignity of every human being. We must be willing to follow what Jesus told us to do, to love one another as he loves all. So, we have hope because God wants to find and to save the spiritually lost, even us when we become lost. God gave us Jesus so that God's heart might be understood through the words and the actions of Jesus. There is no one that God doesn't seek, and there is no one beyond redemption. So may we all be willing to lay down our anger, hate, and fear, so that we can more closely follow Jesus, through whom everything was made, who claims all humanity as children of God.